My mother used to say to my brother and I and my father, when we would get all upset about something, when we were ranting and raving, or complaining, or worried, she would just lay in there very gently, very casually, in the background, like the shamaness she really was, and she would just lay in there quietly the words, "You know, it doesn't really matter." And we would get really upset every time. We would yell at her and say, "Yeah, goddamn matters. You know, we wanted to do this. It's important." And we would argue that this thing, whatever it was, this activity really mattered. And of course, the more we argued for it mattering, the more it mattered. The more it became physical matter. The more it became a thing, an objective, solid, dense, heavy, hard, thick reality. And what she was suggesting from her inner wisdom was that part of the reason we were getting so upset by whatever we were seeing happening is because we were taking it too seriously. We were viewing it as a thing, as physical matter, instead of energy, instead of movement, instead of aliveness, instead of evolution, life happening, the ebb and flow. Instead, we were making it into matter, physical matter. So, ever since I noticed that my mother said that 2 or 3 times a day for 18 years as I grew up, when I would get upset, especially when I left home, I'd hear my mother in the background saying, "You know, it doesn't really matter." And as I started to study quantum physics and I started to learn from my various spiritual teachers and do yoga and Tai Chi and Aikido, and started to notice that nature was all about movement, as I started to notice that change and movement and flow was a much more helpful, a much more enjoyable way to view the world, to hold the world, and to interact with the world. As I started to notice that, I remembered her words, and I'd hear them in the background when I was getting really upset. And I would go, "You know what? It doesn't really matter. I've made it into matter. I've made it into a physical, dense, hard thing. It's really energy." And it really helps me now. Someone asks, "What's the matter?" What they're really asking, what I hear now, when I ask myself that, "What's the matter?" or someone else says, "Well, Keith, what's the matter?" The way I decide to hear it now is they're asking, what out of life's flow, what out of life's adventure and moving energy, aliveness, adventure, have you made matter into physical matter? What energy have you turned into matter so that you now feel stuck in it? It feels heavy, dense, hard to change, restrictive. What have you turned into, from energy, a happening, into matter? A thing, a physical thing. And as I do that, it helps me shift. It helps me to get perspective. I zoom out and I view, oh, I've taken this one little activity or event or change or happening, and I've turned it into something significant, solid, heavy, serious. I've turned it into physical matter. What if I viewed it more as energy, life, expressing, evolving, which in fact, as we know through quantum physics, as in fact we know through spiritual studies, the spiritual perspective, that everything is moving and flowing. No matter how solid it appears, everything is constantly changing and moving. And it's a very practical, very helpful way to view the world as ever-changing, moving, whether you can see it or not, or feel it or not at the time, to have certain phrases, certain triggers, certain ways of viewing the world that will remind you that you have a choice. You have a choice to view something as objective, solid, rigid, hard to change, inflexible, or you can view things as moving, changing, fresh, flowing, energy. And that phrase, what's the matter, really helps me to realize that we often turn life force into matter, when actually the true nature of everything is flowing energy, and that it's more helpful to view everything as flexible and flowing and changing. So for instance, we know this in everyday language. For example, someone will say, well, that's his thing. And we'll protest sometimes and say, well, it's not my thing, it's just what I do sometimes. We can actually feel the constraint, the rigidity of someone saying that that's his thing. And it's really just, and very often, if you'll notice in TVs and movies, people will just say, well, you know, it's just something I do once in a while. But it's not a thing, it's not my thing. And they'll resist the idea of making anything, any activity, into a thing. And we'll say to people when there's some event, some interaction going on, and someone keeps bringing it up, and we'll say to them, let's not make it into a thing. And why are we saying that? We're saying because we realize once we make something into a thing, a noun, label it as a fixed, rigid thing, as matter, then it's harder to change. It has its own life and energy, and it actually becomes a prison. So we even resist someone saying, well, let's not make it into a thing. Let's just say it's something we do once in a while. You can really see this in relationships, because at one point two people really enjoy each other and other people notice, and at one point they come up and say, well, are you two a thing? And no, we're just friends. What does that mean? Why do we say that? Because we want to keep it open, free-flowing, open to new possibility. We don't want to limit it, put restriction onto it, and say, now we're a couple, we're a thing. So you can see this sensitivity to making energy, a life force, just enjoying life, aliveness. You can see that people have this innate, intuitively. We have a resistance to having the free flow of life and enjoyment and fun turned into a thing, into matter. In fact, you know, there are many languages, ancient languages and native languages, where they don't even have nouns. Everything is a verb. So that's a stone, it's stoning. And even the word mattering. Is it mattering to you? Is it becoming matter to you? Is it mattering to you? That's stoning, that's chairing, that's treeing. That's a little awkward in English, but if you view it that way and just realize, oh, that's energy becoming, portraying itself, expressing itself, pretending to be a tree or a chair or a body. And you don't necessarily have to change the word, it's how we view it, how we hold it. And so in those languages, it's beautiful. They even have, all their words are alive with movement. They're all verbs. You can even do it with God. It's a very interesting way to play with God, that God is a verb and not a noun. So everything is Godding. How is your Godding going today? So everything is divine expression. So I'm just suggesting this as a way to play, as an experiment. So every time anyone says, what's the matter? Allow yourself to play with it and just hear it. Okay, they're asking me, what have I turned into matter? Heavy, serious, objective, solid, physical matter. What have I turned into matter that I could leave just as life expression, aliveness, energy?